No.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
So this is the second episode of OSAMP Live, which is a chance for people here at Emmanuel College to talk about some of the current events and issues that are happening around the nation. For the first episode, I was on the panel, and I'll introduce myself in a moment, along with Lori Boyd, Ashley Janot, and Ama Marfo, who is kind of the brains behind the operation. She's actually producing right now. You can't see her on camera, but she's running this whole thing. So today we're going to talk a little bit about more current events. Sadly, a lot of what's happened in recent news has involved, once again, people experiencing extreme violence at the hands of police. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the Sandra Bland case down in Texas. We'll talk a little bit about Sam DuBose in Cincinnati, Ohio. But before we get started, again, my name is Jeff Smith. I'm the Director of Multicultural Programs here at Emmanuel College.
Hi, I'm Lori Boyd, and I'm a senior at Emmanuel.
And I'm Marguerite Moore, and I'm a career advisor in the Career Center.
That's us. And again, Alma's behind the scenes running everything. I'm making her very uncomfortable.
She's amazing.
I'm not mentioning her, but she's the best. So we have some questions that I'll ask the group, and we'll just discuss some of these topics, some of these questions, and kind of go back and forth. So thank you again for joining us. So actually, before we start with the questions, we should probably try to come up with an elegant way to summarize the story for those who may be unfamiliar with who Sandra Bland was before the incident where she was arrested, what spurred her trip in the first place, how did she arrive in jail, and what has happened since she was found dead in her cell. So I don't know if we want to recap or who wants to start that.
Sure. Well, correct me as I'm going, but Sandra Bland was a woman from outside of Chicago who had done her undergrad at Prairie State in Prairie View in Texas, and had applied for a job there and had received the job. So she was in Texas, and she was pulled over by a police officer for an unlawful, an improper turn, so not signaling for her turn. So she was pulled over by a police officer, and then within those interactions, things greatly escalated. She was removed from her vehicle, arrested, brought to jail, and then I believe it was 3 days later, she was dead. And the autopsy stated that she had killed herself. So the current, I guess, belief is that she died by suicide. So I guess in summary, there's a lot of questioning and a lot of confusion as to why she was arrested, whether the police officer acted correctly, followed proper procedures, and then what actually happened when she was in jail. Was it a suicide? What led up to the point of her death?
And I know a lot of people find it really skeptical because she was on her way to her job. Actually, she had her interview, and then I think she had the job already. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of her family members and a lot of arguments surrounding that is just like trying to find out, like, does this make sense that she would kill herself? Does it not make sense that she would kill herself? So.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that you guys really covered that. So that leads into our first question. To you, what distinguishes this case from other incidences of police brutality that has filled the news over the past few months?
Well, I think a couple things. In a way, this is, from my perspective as a Black woman, I think this is one of the first individuals that looks like me. I think she was 27 or 28, so very similar to my own age, about to work at a college. I work at a college, so I think there are a lot of, from the outset, a lot of similarities about just who we are, and the reason she was initially pulled over was very sort of mundane. So that could have happened as well to anyone. So I think seeing those similarities can impact you in a way that's a little different from someone who maybe you had less in common with some of the, the many other people who have experienced police brutality. So I think that one hit me a little bit differently. And then having the dash cam, being able to see all the interactions, I think that was impactful to see how it went from something very, again, mundane to something completely different in a fairly short amount of time.
I agree with you. I think the fact that Sandra was a woman played a huge role into, I think, this new awakening of, oh, okay, well, it's not just Black males, Black women have been and continue to be treated unfairly by the police. And in another sense too, kind of like with what you were saying, the relatability with Sandra, and I know other Black women have been killed as well, but I think this has been because of how she was arrested and because of the reasoning or lack of reasoning behind it, it makes it less controversial in that sense of, oh, okay, she's this angry Black woman, or maybe just like the fact that she was pretty tall, but the fact that she is a woman and the associations that come with being a woman and not a male, so people can not really say like, oh, okay, kind of like Eric Garner was this huge guy and oh, maybe he looked threatening, like the whole Black male as a threat persona that has been depicted in our community, in our society. So I think that was one of the biggest reasons why, relating back to the question, that this has been like pretty profound in terms of differences with the different cases.
I think one thing that really struck me was the fact that, as both of you mentioned, it escalated so quickly, but just the threat of violence, how that came out so quickly. Not only, it kind of skipped, there was never any mention of, I'll take you to jail, or I'm going to write your ticket. It was just instantly, I'm going to light you up. And I just found that so upsetting to think.
Did you see the full video too?
Yes.
Like how before, like they stopped a college student,
Right.
and his demeanor was completely
completely different. And I think what was odd too is that the ticket, it was pretty much, it looked like it was written at that point. When he came back to the car, it looked like he had already done any preliminary work that he needed to do. And it seemed like the fact that she was smoking in the car just set him off. And when you think about it, if you're about to give someone a ticket and then they're going to drive off, just finish the ticket, just call it a day. If it annoys you or not, the fact that he made such a point of it, and then because she was questioning it, that set him off even further. It almost seemed like he wanted something to happen. If he truly just wanted, she had stopped the car, the interaction was happening. So if he truly just wanted to finish writing the ticket, and then she would have left and it would have been fine. But he sort of kept asking her questions, asking if everything was okay. And then when she explained why it wasn't, he almost had an issue with that. So at that point, it seemed like it was pretty much going to be a lose-lose situation.
I know we cut you off. Going
No. This is the beauty of OSAMP Live. It's live.
Yes.
It's real. Let's see. Our producer just gave us some notes. And then you just mentioned the dash cam, and we've seen the dash cam, and I think initially it looked like there were some patches, some inconsistencies, some edits. So what does that mean to either of you?
I think just watching the full video, hopefully the unedited version, it's just interesting to me why he pulled her away from the dash cam, because at least from my understanding of how that should go when a cop, stops you, and it should be done, like the whole procedure should be done in front of the dash cam. And so I just found it really odd why it just moved towards and that's when everything escalated. And so although you could hear the audio, you couldn't really see it until the bystander took a portion of what was going on. So I found that really odd with the dash cam video.
Right. And there was also a part when you could hear the audio, but you couldn't see anything, where he was telling the bystander to leave and that he needed, the person needed to leave. And I sort of wonder, I think things start to get really murky knowing what your rights are as a citizen, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. Because I think if that bystander hadn't been taking a video, that part of the, the conversation wouldn't be there. And we wouldn't necessarily have known that she was on the ground or that, his knee was in her back and things like that. So it's challenging from the bystander's perspective. Should they have continued, should they continue to do that and then potentially put themselves in harm's way as well? Or what? It's just hard to know what are your rules, what are your rights,
Right.
What will impact you. Because at this point, I think it's so murky, it's hard to know.
In a conversation with someone, they brought up the point that if dash cams and body cameras are something that are introduced to law enforcement and they're more popular, they're used to validate things, then this person believes that eventually that'll be somehow, there'll be more editing. You'll see more instances of editing of tapes or pieces missing. So this person proposes that the victims, people who are bystanders, those are always going to be the most reliable sources of video and of evidence. And this person said, we're so grateful that people are pulling out their phones and catching some of the things, the Walter Scott shooting in South Carolina. That was a bystander's cell phone. So this person says the public has to almost, the responsibility is on the public to maybe police and to capture some of these things, because they're under the impression that the dash cams will not be a reliable source of video.
And she even says that, like she told in the bystanders video, like, thank you for recording. She kept repeating that, like, thank you for recording. So I think in a sense that and it's kind of sad when she said that, and the fact that I would understand why she would have her phone, and it just shows like the tension between the police and citizens, especially Black citizens, and the fear of her life. Because, and going back to rights, is it her right to have her phone? And when he said to put it down, I almost feel as though by her leaving her phone down, she felt very vulnerable. Like that was, maybe she was calling somebody, because I realized she was talking kind of loud and at first before the phone was like down. So in that sense, I think it's really scary, but then I also sympathize with her. And I know a lot of other people may argue and say she was being like extra by just not listening the first time. But I think it definitely raises the question and the ethical dilemma of, okay, you have policemen who are supposed to be policing, and to an extent, yes, you should follow the law, but what happens when the law is so tainted in a negative light in one particular community, that how do you defend yourself? Like, what is right, what is wrong? Like, for me, it was really conflicting, like, thinking about my faith too, like, as a Christian, okay, like, what would Jesus do, and just at the same time, like, okay, like, there's one thing of turning the other cheek, but how do you handle, 'cause I believe her response was very eloquent, the way she handled it, but it's just very hard, like you were saying, with the law, and then with your moral beliefs, like what is right? Because I don't think she was acting in a way that was extreme by all means. I think that she was very smart by having her phone out. So,
and I think the video, she clearly got more frustrated as the video continued, and they were almost building off of each other. And I feel like if he's the person supposedly in power and he's approaching her, it should be his job to work on de-escalating instead of furthering it. And then she's gonna, maybe she was scared, maybe she was defensive, whatever the case was, and then she's gonna heighten that. So I feel like he didn't handle the situation properly in not trying to de-escalate it first, especially if you come in knowing that this is just about an improper turn. I feel like that can put context into your head, and you can think, okay, what happened wasn't a big deal. I'm going to focus even more on de-escalating it because it's not a big deal, instead of he seemed to be okay with it becoming a bigger thing, when at the end of the day he knew that was all there was there. There didn't seem to be any other concerns about anything happening in the car or anything that she had done. So it seemed odd. It seemed like his ego had gotten bruised a little bit. He was a little frustrated that she wasn't responding in the way that he wanted her to respond.
Right.
And that was a problem for him. And I think that's a problem for a lot of people in authority. They want people to respond exactly how they imagine it. And if that doesn't happen, they don't know how to react. And I think that was a huge problem here.
Right. I agree wholeheartedly. With that type of power comes the responsibility, like you said, to de-escalate the situation. I think that it says a lot that he never said, ma'am, I can see why you're upset. However, I believe you broke a law. It seemed like there was a power dynamic that was at work. And that's frustrating to see for a lot of reasons. But I think outside of the fact that he's the enforcer of the law and should be doing that, it's also frustrating because I think a lot of times in my life, I've seen people disrespectful to law enforcement and nothing happened. And I think that as we talk about privilege, I have seen Black people who've been disrespectful to police officers and nothing has happened. But there are tons of YouTube videos where there are people who are screaming at police officers and they're just taking it. And very rarely are they people of color. And I think that says a lot about privilege to where some people feel like they are entitled to scream at police. There was a joke in Dave Chappelle's stand-up a couple of years ago where he was with a friend who was white and he was saying, I need your badge number. And Dave's like, don't get out of the car. And I think that there's some truth to that, where I don't think white people or other people may visualize themselves being in harm's way when they're interacting with the police. But I think sometimes as people of color, that's the first thing we think about is the fact that we might be in danger. And I think she was obviously frustrated. And then once she realized that she was in danger, it was just like, oh my goodness, this nightmare is coming true.
Right.
And
it's almost like she was hyperventilating. Like once that realization hit, and it's understandable. I mean, and she wasn't doing anything crazy.
No.
Yeah.
Right. I
Once
mean,
she
she was
realized
really
that.
just yelling. She was using profanity. She was yelling, but there was nothing really past that. And I think even after he had asked if she was okay, and she had, like you said, this really eloquent answer as to why she wasn't, his response was, "Are you done?" So that was a very dismissive response. Right. So why ask the question in the first place? He could have just finished writing the ticket and moved on without even addressing it. Instead, he was further dismissive, and then, like we know, as we talked about, it moved on.
Right. So maybe this is a good point to move on to our second question. So how do you guys feel about the connection between who Sandra Bland was as an individual and her eventual end?
Yeah, I feel like it was tragic irony in a way. I mean, she talked about wanting to combat just that and wanting to be a social justice advocate and wanting to help, better society. So for her to now be a victim of that very thing, I think that was even crazier. And I think now that so many people post their own thoughts on Facebook and things like that, being able to actually hear things that she said, I think that makes it a little eerie.
I agree with you. I think it's it brings me chills, like watching some of the videos that she posted and realizing how symmetrical, like the issues she was talking about, like how it happened to her. And which brings me to the next point of like, you just really don't know. And I think that's another reason why this case is so special compared to the other ones, because of her views that she already had put out into the media and how on point it was in terms of like the issues that arose from her death and how she got arrested. And so in that way, it really brought a sense of, wow, this can really happen to any of us. Like this could happen to me. And she didn't, in a sense, like they couldn't really portray her as like a thug because of the fact that she went to college, she had her education. By looking at her video, you could see by her manner of speech, she clearly knew how to vocalize her words in an eloquent way. So, yeah, I definitely think that it was interesting, like a lot of the stuff that she had to say on her videos and how her demise just ended pretty tragically.
Yeah, I think this is the epitome of a tragedy. And I know that there are some folks who believe that she did not take her own life. But either way, it's heartbreaking. And I think that if it's a suicide, it's heartbreaking for a different reason, because obviously she was in the depths of despair. And I think the cellmate from across the hallway said that she was in there in the cell by herself for the entire duration of her time there. The cellmate said that she had, the woman in the cell across from her said that she had cellmates, and they did help each other navigate just the day-to-day life in the cell. So just already having experienced that sort of trauma and then having to sit in a cell by yourself, that it's heartbreaking to think that that may have driven her to take her own life. If she did not take her own life, and that's tragic for a very different reason. So it's just really, really heartbreaking. And think about so many young people of color who are just frustrated with things that they experience, whether it's in the educational system or the legal system. And she had so much potential. She was someone who was about to be employed at her alma mater. She moved from a different part of the country back to Texas. It seemed like she had a lot going for her. It's really heartbreaking.
I think one of the only good things that I see from this situation and just some of the views that she believed, I feel like from some of the things that I saw that she spoke about, that she's like an idealist, similar to what Dr. King was hoping and dreaming for, just the compromise between both sides and just wanting that unity, even though her end didn't come to that at all. The fact that she was still her job and the position that she had, and I really think that she was really still striving for that hope that we could still have that unity. So I think that's one thing, despite the negativity and just the horrible way that her life ended, that people should take out of at least that hope. And because I know that still amongst our Black community, there's a sense of, okay, now everybody just get guns and just react in violence, just fighting the violence and the injustice with more violence. But I don't think that that's something that Sandra would have wanted at all from the stuff that she's been saying on her posts. So.
Okay, so we'll segue to the next questions. So, particular attention is being drawn to the officer's conduct. Actually, we talked a little bit about this. So, what issues do the role of police officers, and in this case and others? I just want to mention two cases that we caught wind of this week. One was right here locally in the Boston area, where a driver in the city of Medford was stopped after somehow incorrectly navigating a rotary and was stopped by an off-duty police officer who told him that I'll blow a hole through your head. This guy had a dash cam actually in his vehicle, so he was able to record the whole exchange. And then also Sam DeBose was shot in the head and killed in the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, by a University of Cincinnati police officer. The dash cam footage actually was
the body cam, I believe.
Was it body cam? Sorry, the body cam footage actually led to the officer's indictment for murder. So again, thinking about the Sandra Bland case, the Sam DuBose case, and what happened in Medford, sorry, I got a little lost.
No, you're fine. Is it about the police question with
yes, so
the behavior of police?
The behavior of police and law enforcement officers. So the debate about body cams, rights to film, how are these all connected? It's pretty obvious how they're all connected, but where's the national conversation go?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there are some alarming trends that keep happening, and I feel like they're not being addressed. I don't know what police departments are doing I don't know what those conversations look like, if there are any conversations, but clearly there need to be more, it needs to be more effective, because I think the level of hostility and of aggressiveness that starts from the get-go, I think that's super alarming. I think with the Medford example, the police or the detective was off duty. So why a citizen would think that, I mean, there are all sorts of angry drivers that, we hear about people being aggressive, and, if someone comes at your car, with the baseball bat, of course, you're going to want to drive away and remove yourself from that situation. So why the detective thought that it was okay for him to do the same thing, and it was at night. He said he showed a badge, but can you even tell what a badge is if it's the middle of the night? Someone who's clearly angry at you is coming at you, in an aggressive manner. So, I mean, thankfully that situation didn't end worse, because I think there was potential for it to. And the minute, I guess, going back to the whole idea of cameras, that the Medford citizen or resident mentioned, I have a camera, I just want to let you know, blah, blah, blah. And then as soon as he mentioned that, it was, well, I'm going to seize the camera and this and that. So I feel like there's still, it's sort of a contentious relationship about filming or not to film. I think it's positive in the sense of we wouldn't have even known that incident happened. We wouldn't have known, maybe that officer wouldn't have been indicted in the case of Cincinnati, was if there weren't something on film. But at the same time, the minute that you say, I have a camera, the minute you take your phone out to record, there's even more aggression against you. So it's sort of one of those, what do you do in that situation? If somebody is going to further attack you for having a camera, should you go ahead and do that, or should you turn it off? I don't know. I think it poses a lot of hard questions. What do you do?
I just visualized while you're talking, like the conversations that parents, Black parents would have with their kids about, not the birds and the bees talk I saw on Instagram, like photo on that, but more so, when you're Black and you get pulled over, what do you do?
Right.
The typical thing is like they tell you put your hands, on the wheel, make sure your voice is very calm and you're portraying yourself as being not like a threatening figure. And now thinking now the thing is, the cell phone, now how are parents and families discussing, what are you saying? How do you put the phone so the cop doesn't see it? So then they won't escalate to anger and you won't get in trouble, but you still want to make sure that you're being protected if you did feel threatened, like Sandra did. Mm-hmm. I feel like she was trying to do that with her phone.
Right, and it didn't really get her too far.
If anything, I think that it provoked the officer even more, it got him more mad.
Right.
But I agree with you. It just makes a list of questions arise, and it's hard. It's one of those split-second decisions. And
I think for me, the challenge is no one in authority seems to want to respond to any of those questions, because going back to the Medford case, he said afterwards, can I talk to you guys? And they're like, oh no, it's, drive away. And he wanted to talk to he said, well, XYZ happened and, I felt threatened, and it was immediately, we'll deal with that in court, instead of saying anything that was even remotely helpful or, empathetic or, these are the steps to report it. It was sort of, we're going to brush it under the rug, drive away. You should be happy that you just got a warning or, whatever the case was. So I think there's a responsibility for people in authority to be accountable for what they're doing. And I don't see that happening right now.
I'm still in favor of body cameras and dash cams, but for a different reason. I think initially when I got the sense that, these are going to be more popular, I thought that they were going to possibly prevent aggression, but now I feel like they're necessary. So hopefully we can prove
to document the aggression,
to capture all the facts. And then, as I mentioned earlier, going back to the Sandra Bland case, there's part of me that feels like, well, things can still get doctored, So it's a scary idea to think that safety is best created by everyone having a camera and having different angles and
Right.
different people filming stuff. But thank goodness for some of these cases that there was footage. And I was someone who, if you visit London, there are closed circuit cameras, CCTVs everywhere. So you are walking down an alley, you look up and see a camera. And I remember first time seeing something like that, just kind of being chilled. It was, oh man, this is crazy being taped. But there's part of me that thinks maybe that isn't such a bad thing, just because we need proof. We need proof of some of the things that are happening, because people aren't lying about people who live to tell about certain things. They're not lying about these things. And I think that in the case of the guy who got pulled over in Medford, if you go tell someone, hey, this off-duty detective threatened to blow my head off, that sounds pretty far-fetched.
Right,
that's exactly what happened.
That's exactly what happened.
If it wasn't for that dash cam, there'd be no proof of that. So there's part of me that's kind of torn between, cameras being everywhere, recording everything we do. If we're walking down the street, we trip and fall, there's someone got that on tape.
Right.
But for the greater good of society, especially for some of us in the communities of color who feel like we've been picked on, who feel like we are under a constant threat, if that helps save lives, if that helps hold people accountable for the crimes they commit against us, then I gotta say I'm all for it. But there's a lot of complexity in that.
Right. I mean, I don't think the indictment would have happened without the camera footage. And even when I believe it was the DA, he said after viewing it that very much impacted how he felt. And he said he was going to view the police officer as a murderer, which I think when you see the video makes perfect sense. And if that video hadn't existed, there could have been a lot more room for, well, maybe this had happened, maybe that had happened, but the video makes it very clear this was exactly what happened, and this was the result, and clearly those two things did not match.
Right. Because the next officer in the scene, they corroborated their story, I believe. So someone said they witnessed him being dragged by the car, like the first person to respond to his call. So it would have been all these people telling the story against the dead man. So it's.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I feel like not just police, but people in authority often will stick to supporting the various other people in authority without questioning maybe that person did do something wrong. And I think in the case of police officers, if they had all just continued to agree with one another, people would have viewed it as, well, 5 police saw one thing, and then, this one person was clearly lying. So I think there's also no accountability between holding themselves accountable. I think it is viewed as a brotherhood, and I think that can be dangerous when, taken into these situations where people won't hold each other accountable.
That's a great point. I think that's the scariest thing for me, having family in law enforcement, very close friends, and people who are excellent people who do things correctly. And I wonder just what goes on, because I know that there are people who don't think that this is good or cool. But are their voices silenced? Are they who challenges them? I really worry about that, because I think that a lot of times there may be influences that the public doesn't even consider that might be involved.
Sure.
Thinking about Ferguson in New York, we started thinking about the connections between district attorneys and police and different politicians. Sometimes you feel the idea that maybe if there was someone on the force who's going to stick up, there's so many forces against them to say, don't share that information or get your story straight. I feel like just sometimes the pressure's not even necessarily internal and inside the quote unquote brotherhood, but it might be from elsewhere, which really kind of proves that it's systemic.
Yeah.
That makes me think about if there's so much pressure and so much chaos that is occurring to a public system like the police force, there should perhaps be laws, more laws. I know for local laws it's different, but I don't know, it makes me think maybe the Supreme Court should issue a national law that pertains to these issues that requires mandatory training for police officers so that these things can be addressed. I don't know. Like, I feel like it's just so reoccurring that it's just very weird to me that for issues that are so extreme like this and people losing their lives, that more laws pertaining to these issues are being thought of in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I always wonder if there were more laws, how would they be, executed? What would that look like? And who are the people in power? And are the people in power just exacerbating, what's already happening, or would they be changing things? So I think it gets super complicated about, clearly there's a problem. I think at least some of the country would agree with that. But where to move forth and how to get everyone on board, because I think there are some people who, despite all of the videos, despite all of the incidents, would still say the police officer was, doing what they should be doing and the other person was in the wrong. So I think just getting people on the same page, I don't know if that in and of itself will ever happen.
Right. I think time might tell if real changes are made. I think in the case of Sammy Bowes and also Walter Scott in South Carolina, the officers who shot those two men are being charged with murder. So if they are found guilty and go to jail, that would be quite a message to send to police officers if they know, okay, you know what?
We'll be held accountable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And even if I don't have a dash cam or if I don't have a body cam on, someone may be filming this. And it's sad to think that would be the motive to avoid jail.
Right.
But if it keeps people alive, then I think that would help. Great question. I'm trying to figure out how to. So in this, for the Sam DeVoe situation, swift action came to arrest the officer. Do you guys think that might be because he was a University of Cincinnati officer as opposed to a City of Cincinnati police officer?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess I'm not super familiar with what that hiring structure looks like. I know I've worked on campuses where even though it was a campus police officer, there was still some type of correlation with the city police force. So I don't really know. I think from the University of Cincinnati's perspective, they may not want one of their employees attached to this type of incident. So perhaps that was part of it. Perhaps it was partially, we want to be disassociated with this, or we want to have a strong message so that when our new students come and when our students come to campus, they know that we're not going to stand for it and that we'll take swift action. So maybe that was partially the reason. I don't know. I mean, I'm glad so far it seems like what's happened after that incident has been productive. So hopefully it will continue to move in that direction. But I guess time will tell as well.
Yes. And just a little side note, and I believe there was no violence yesterday in the city of Cincinnati. So there were peaceful protests, a lot of mourning, but there was no violence towards anyone in law enforcement. So I think that's important to also note. So, thank you. But yeah, this is interesting. He was a University of Cincinnati police officer, and I believe he was outside of his jurisdiction. I believe that he was off campus when this happened. So I guess we need to wait for more information because I think a lot of things will
see it unravel.
Right. Yeah. But it's just really tough to think what would make it almost feels like this person's pursuing this type of not opportunity. I don't want to say that he was actively looking to shoot someone, but to pull someone over for not having a front license plate, I just don't understand how it can escalate to that.
Right, and I feel like just in general, there are other crimes that are most likely happening in the city or other police type work that could be done, whether it's, assisting a community or whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be, fighting crime in the active sense. So there are probably plenty of other things he could have been doing with his time. So to pull someone over for something, I guess the question becomes, what types of offenses are really worthy of being pulled over versus something that could just be fixed at a later date? You know, maybe it's not the best thing to not have a front license plate, but does that really warrant being pulled over? You know, there are a lot of sort of small things, people who don't have, you know, brake lights and things like that. There are a lot of
That's
sort
a
of
safety issue.
right. There are a lot of small things that happen, and are they really? Should that turn into someone being pulled over, or should that turn into you know, they'll deal with it later? I don't know. It starts to seem like some of these recent incidents, things are getting pettier and pettier.
Yeah, and going back to the Sandra Bland case, if I tell someone, hey, I pulled over because I saw you quickly approaching me, and that's why I need my blinker, what's wrong with saying, that makes sense?
Right.
Have a nice day.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe she was speeding. I think it was an improper lane change.
Yeah.
So I know that sometimes if I see anyone, whether it's a police car or just any car, sometimes my first instinct is just to get over because I want to get out of the way. And if that's what happened, then I'm really curious as to why, because she stated that's why she got over.
Right.
But you're right. Why is this? Doesn't sound like anything major. Why can't there be a warrant?
It makes me think of like the stop and frisk issues that was going on in New York, and how in one documentary, I can't remember the name, some of the officers, they didn't identify themselves, but they were discussing how they felt the pressure. And I think one officer was Black, and how he felt the pressure, you know, to meet quota, and how some of them didn't want to do it, but like the pressure, the inside pressure from the department to carry out these different petty kind of like, not laws, but petty things that they need to do in order to be looked upon by the deputy or whoever's in charge that, okay, you're doing a good job, you're making X, Y, and Z amount of arrests, and that's within the range that you're supposed to be doing. So if that's one of the issues, that makes me think that's definitely a problem, like that needs to be addressed in terms of, it's kind of like so aside from the setting of working for the police department, say you're in a corporation and the buildings are in bad conditions, and that affects the quality of work that your coworkers and your workers will be producing. And so in that way, I feel like kind of like union regulations, like that's what I kind of meant by like the laws. Like there needs to be something that's protecting, if that is part of the pressure, especially for the cops that are Black, there needs to be something there for them that they won't feel like, okay, I can just, I'm forced to ethically break some of the things that I don't believe in and do X, Y, and Z. That's the only connection to the hazing that I could think of, like in terms of that. But that's definitely an issue that is going on within the system.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you had mentioned before, you've seen various populations of people being disrespectful to the police and things not happening. I think there have been plenty of instances where police have either looked the other way or not chosen to pursue something that was going on. And I think in college campuses, especially larger college campuses, if there are big parties happening or after a sports team wins or something, there's often a lot of activity, and you can imagine that some of it is most likely not law-abiding. And there are plenty of times when those types of issues aren't pursued. Right. So I think an officer always can think, is this something worth pursuing or is this not? And I feel like, is there a different, do they think of that differently depending on who's in the car? And I feel like the incidents that have happened recently would make you believe, there's definitely some difference as to what they're pursuing and then how they choose to pursue it once it's in progress.
And letting some of that stuff go I feel like that would improve just people's morale and just improve people's approach and improve their mindset when dealing with law enforcement. I think that if the officer would have let Sandra Bland go, maybe she'd process that and say, you know what, that was cool. I appreciate that. And I thought this was going to go a different way. There's a lot of distrust with between communities of color and law enforcement. And I think that it comes down to that, exactly that sometimes. I'm getting in trouble for something that is not major, something that I've seen other people not get in trouble for, so why should I listen to you? And I think that's something that I've thought about recently. These things could have been prevented. Even the Walter Scott video, he was pulled over, I think, for a license plate infraction. I feel like there's some conversations that, and I've actually benefited from a lot of conversations about registration stickers and stuff, where I felt like, you know what, thank you, officer. Get that, I got a message one time, get that fixed, like right now. Go get that, what is the sticker? I think it's the emission sticker. Go get the emission sticker right now. And I appreciate it. I did that because in some instances I felt like you could have given me a ticket, but you did it, and that meant a lot. And I thought, okay, let me go get that fixed. People would be alive if people had adopted that attitude. People would not be going to jail for improper lane changes.
Right.
If someone said, you know what, I'm gonna let this go. So
yeah, I mean, I think there are enough actual crimes happening where we don't need to waste our time with minor things that could be more informational and more educational. Because if it was just a matter of getting a license plate, that's relatively easy, or getting a sticker, or not making that improper change, that could be a quick conversation,
right.
and that be it. It doesn't have to become something bigger.
Right. And the power dynamic doesn't even really need to exist in some of those cases.
Yeah.
I'm just someone sharing information with you. I thought that lane change was improper. Please don't do it again.
Right. For me, I think the power dynamic is the biggest issue, because I think it leads to so many other issues.
Right. Definitely. This next question is going to ask you to reflect a little bit. So, this is the latest in a long string of difficult racially charged events in the news in our collective consciousness. How have you coped with these issues as they presented themselves, sometimes with little time to process and mourn in between?
Yeah, it's a good question. I hadn't seen the dash cam videos of any of the incidents that we talked about until today, which was maybe a bad decision to watch them back to back. In retrospect, I probably would not do that. But sometimes it gets to the point where you don't want to watch another video. It can be, sometimes you do sort of want to just put that away, which ultimately you can't, because it's happening. You can pretend like it doesn't exist. Clearly it is. But I think sometimes it can be taxing to sit down on what seems like a weekly, bi-weekly, it seems like it's getting more and more frequent, to sit down on a regular basis and watch someone being harassed or someone being killed potentially, So I don't know. I don't know if there's really a good coping mechanism that I've adopted. I like the fact that I can engage in these types of conversations. I think that's really helpful, whether it's with you or with family members or friends. I think having a space to just talk about, this is what's happening, this is sort of how I'm processing it, what are some other things I should be thinking about, I think that's been the most helpful.
I think this is where I'm really grateful to be a psychology major with concentration in counseling. And so just learning a lot of different mechanisms. Everyone's different. For me, linking back to my faith, just trying to have a moment of silence in the morning, because that's like the hardest time for me, because that's when you get especially with social media and another death. And I'm like, wow, really? And so just making sure to center myself and have time for myself, because it really hurts seeing a lot of your peers, especially as college students, and not having as much of a space, since this is during the summer. But now, of course, I'm with this really great idea. That's not really an issue anymore. But prior to that, just making sure that you have time for yourself, because I think a lot of my peers who are students of color think sometimes, oh, if I'm not 100% in tune with this 24/7 every minute of the day, with these issues, that I am doing Eric Gardner or Sandra Bland, and the list goes on, an injustice because I'm not thinking about them every single second of the day. And that's just an unhealthy way to think. And I don't think that that's helpful to not only yourself as an individual, but just the people that you are surrounding yourself with, because it's a lot. Like, these issues are heavy. You're dealing with deaths, you're dealing with national and international level issues. And so it's definitely important, like some of those suggestions that you made, like speaking to different people who you feel like are connected with you, having discussions, talking to faculty, all of you all who make themselves available. So in that way, that's the way that I handle the stress. And I hope that, I know one of my statuses that I put on Facebook would kind of like that question, answering that, putting different things that people can do to de-stress themselves, because it's pretty heavy. This is all really heavy.
It's super heavy.
Yeah.
I've really tried to reflect and think about the civil rights movement and how hard it was for people to see some of the images as they were happening there. And I almost feel like it's helpful for people to see things that a lot of us have always heard. So to get that confirmation and to have the public see, we've been saying that this has been happening our entire lives. So it's really painful, but it's also a little bit validating. Every time I hear something, I think, oh my goodness, this is
So I'm not
heartbreaking,
crazy.
but I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what I've heard has happened, for 150, 200, 300 years here in this country. So there's part of me that feels like, okay, people are finally seeing it, but not all the, some responses obviously
Right.
aren't great to hear. So I think I would love for more people to be outraged and to be upset by what they see. And then also just the level of gun violence that is happening in this country. I just feel like we're watching something historical, and I'm not sure what direction it's heading, whether it's going to be something that changes everything for the better, or if this really tells the world this is who we are. But outside of the shootings and the violence that has plagued the Black community, there have just been the random school shootings and shootings in movie theaters and shooting in churches, and just so much violence. It really is hard to find a good place sometimes. But again, connecting with colleagues and with students, I think, is definitely the most the most comforting thing. Just to keep talking to people. So yeah. So I think we're going to wrap up with one more question. So as members of a community, what can others, including those in the majority, do to help you cope without placing pressure? And we have a reading list that we can share, but do you guys have any ideas before we share that?
Well, I think for me, I like hearing a variety of perspectives. I think sometimes that helps me clarify my own perspective. Sometimes it helps me further, know why I believe what I believe. So I think encouraging other people to be a part of the conversation. I had just seen the documentary on MTV, I think White People, I think it was called. And one of the questions that it raised was, they asked a bunch of sort of white student age, 18 to 24 type people, how often have you had a conversation about race with your family, with your friends, versus people of color? And their answers were basically never, I don't think about it. So I think that's almost part of the problem. I think getting people, I think it's fine if you believe differently, or if you have other views, and maybe at some point we'll come to the middle, or whatever the case is. But at least just being able to engage in that conversation, being able to acknowledge things that are happening in the world and how that impacts, if nothing else, our country. So I feel like that's important for the majority to get involved, because I think it can be very easy for anything to just put a blind eye to it and move on. And if it's not directly impacting you, I think it can be very easy to dismiss it.
I completely agree. I think discussions are a powerful thing, even though it sounds, compared to going to a protest, it may sound as if it's not really the same level. But I think that especially if you're dealing with people who may not seem to understand at all where people of color are coming from, especially with U.S. history, then it's very like wise to start off very light. And I think discussions are a great way for that light transition of change and talking about things, because the biggest thing is that we're not talking about it. And even amongst my peers who are in the majority, it can get really frustrating because, especially with being in the North too, and you know, the excuse that'll be like, oh yeah, well, like, you know, well, we're liberal and all of these other labels, but it's, yeah, it's just very frustrating. I'm thinking about the I Racist article. Yeah, that we read. So that will also be, I think, we'll be sending that out for people to take a look at. And I think it's really powerful and pretty much, I don't want to go on and expand on what he says in the article, but it pretty much sums up, I feel like, what my experience has been as a college student up north, and not just because of my institution, but in more terms of just because Boston is surrounded by so many colleges, but talking to other college students, the state of ignorance, and it's not like intended in a bad way, but it's just because nobody's talking. So I think discussions, I agree with you, are a good way to break that wall.
I feel like we are close to the end of our discussion. So, wow, this was great.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah,
So
this
too.
is good.
So I'd like to thank you both, Laurie, Marguerite,
Yes, thank you.
and Amma for the third time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Alma.
You don't want to say hi to the folks on the other side of the camera?
And thank you, Jeff, for the asking the
Yes.
questions.
Being our moderator.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes.
Thank you.
I'm definitely ready for CNN. So
Yeah, right. Next step.
yeah,
CNN.
any day now, I'll get a call. So this reading list, should I share it now or?
We'll
Sure.
post it too.
Oh, great.
We'll post it too. But
Okay, we'll post it too. But the article that both Laurie and Marguerite just referred to is titled "I Racist" by John Mehta. The second article on our reading list is "Coping While Black: A Season of Traumatic News Takes a Psychological Toll." That was written by Cheryl Corley. Bland's Image Goes Far Beyond Dashcam Video by Mike Tolson, Leah Vinkovitz, and St. John Barnett Smith. Quote from Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And Cop Caught on Dashcam Threatening to Blow a Hole Through Driver's Head by Kristen Toussaint and Shannon McMahon. So those articles will capture some of the topics we discussed today. So hopefully folks can check those out. And we can actually send that list out too if you're interested, so you can contact us. But thank you again. That concludes our second episode of OSAMP Live.
Yeah.
Stay cool, everybody.